Previously, the group discussed what they'd found out from Kareska and tried to figure out what to do next. Kess reached out to Weejoss via Commune to ask a few questions, and the group as a whole was very concerned that the goddess of death seemed to be scared of Arspec. Kareska also seemed worried about that, as Weejoss was apparently not known for being particularly melodramatic. Kareska gave Kess enough incense to cast legend lore at some point in the future, and then she sent the group back to Rialto's Grove. Rialta was shocked to see them all suddenly appear, but she went with it. She was getting used to weird things happening when the group was involved. Rialta went to gather everyone currently staying with her so that the group could go through everything they learned while in limbo. The only thing they didn't bring up was the Amulet of Disjunction, as they thought it might be safer for everyone if they kept that to themselves. As they filled everyone in on what they knew, three of the group, Ren, Kess, and Zarakir, noticed that Fran's eyes twitched a little when they mentioned the Triad. After the group was finished explaining everything, Rialta asked if Adria and Tony would be willing to travel to the swamp to speak with the druids there. She thought they needed to come together. The two of them headed out. Everyone else split up into smaller groups. Ren pulled Fran aside to talk to him privately, and Kess, who noticed that Ren had picked up on Fran's twitch, stayed in the area. As Ren was talking to Fran, this time when he mentioned the Triad, Fran looked confused, and his nose started to bleed. Upon seeing that, Kess made a beeline over to take a closer look, but they couldn't find any sign of a physical reason for it, which seemed to imply that there was probably a magical reason behind it instead. Kess suggested that Fran go sit down so they could cast some healing magic on him to try to make sure he was fine health-wise. Fran didn't argue, and he let Kess cast Greater Restoration on him via their prayer beads. It was as if there was scar tissue on Fran's brain. Kess could tell that someone had done something to affect not only his memories, but his emotions, time and time again. Enough that Greater Restoration wasn't going to be enough to fix it, at least not just one casting of it. Fran's nose started to bleed even more than it had a moment earlier, so Rin went to grab everyone else as it was clearly urgent. Once the rest of the group was there, Kess filled the others in on what they'd been able to tell when they cast Greater Restoration. Isaac cast Identify to try to get more details, and he was able to tell that someone had cast Modify Memory on Fran dozens upon dozens upon dozens of times. The first one had been cast decades earlier, prior to his marriage to the Emperor. With that many castings of Modify Memory, it would take over a month of casting Greater Restoration daily to undo the damage. And they didn't have a month. As the others panicked a little and discussed what their options were, Kess set up a silent plea to Weejoss asking for help. One might say that they asked for a little bit of divine intervention, and to their absolute shock, they got a response. Kess's hand began to glow under the glove they were wearing. The others simply saw Fran suddenly go unconscious, bleeding profusely from his nose. To Kess, though, it looked as if a glowing hand reached down to touch Fran, as the year's worth of spells were removed in an instant. Kess quickly cast the most powerful heal spell they had to keep Fran from bleeding out. They moved the unconscious Fran to a bed. Several of the others stayed in the room with them, switching out somewhat as time passed. Kess stayed the entire time, though, as they clearly felt guilty for causing him harm by fixing his modified memories, even though they hadn't exactly expected it to work. Bertrand pulled Kess aside to talk to them and made it clear that it was amazing what they'd done. When Kess mentioned that they'd seen a hand reaching down, Bertrand and everyone else listening were even more impressed. After 4 hours, Fran woke up and was clearly affected by whatever memories he'd regained. And that is where we left off.